The sun was a merciless hammer on the cracked earth of the Masai Mara. For 5 days, the immense male lion had known nothing but a cycle of agony and despair. His left hind leg, once a pillar of raw power, was now a useless limb, a throbbing anchor to the earth, tangled in the cruel, tightening wire of a poacher's snare. The wire, thin and almost invisible in the tall, dry grass, had been meticulously placed to avoid detection by park rangers and safari vehicles. It was a silent, lethal promise of a painful end. His name among the rangers and local Maasai who knew his territory was Shuja, the Brave One. He was a king in his prime, his mane a dark, formidable halo that marked him as a dominant force. But now, his roar was a pathetic, hoarse grunt, and the predatory gleam in his amber eyes was clouded by a film of exhaustion and pain. The flies, drawn by the stench of his infected wound, buzzed relentlessly around him, a constant, maddening torment. Every attempt to pull free only tightened the wire, cutting deeper into his flesh, threatening to sever the tendons and crush the bone. He was a monument of wild power brought to its knees, a symbol of the savannah's fragile beauty corrupted by human greed. Ilara was not a park ranger or a local guide. She was a storyteller, a photographer whose lens sought not just the grand spectacle of the Great Migration, but the quiet, intimate truths of the savannah. Her Land Rover, a well-traveled vessel of her passion, was her home for months at a time. She had a deep, almost spiritual connection to this land, a respect born of years of observing its relentless cycles of life and death. Today, she was tracking a rare carmine bee-eater, her camera ready, her mind focused on the subtle shift of feathers and light. It was this singular focus that led her off the main track and into an area rarely visited by tourists. A sudden, sharp cry of pain, unlike any animal sound she had ever heard, cut through the quiet hum of the midday heat. It was a guttural, desperate sound that sent a chill down her spine. Abandoning her pursuit of the bird, Ilara grabbed her binoculars and scanned the horizon. She saw him then, a dark, motionless lump in the distance, partially hidden by a thicket of acacia. The sight of the lion was one thing, but the stillness was what raised her alarm. A lion in the open, in broad daylight, was either sleeping or in distress. The guttural cries had told her which it was. Her heart pounding, Ilara drove cautiously, her movements deliberate and slow to avoid further startling the already terrified beast. She knew the dangers. A cornered, injured animal was an unpredictable force of nature, capable of lashing out in a final act of defense. But she also knew she couldn't leave him. To abandon him would be a moral failing she couldn't live with. As she got closer, the full horror of the situation became clear. The wire, a single, unassuming thread of death, was a stark contrast to the massive, powerful animal it held captive. Shuja saw her approach, and a low, menacing growl rumbled in his chest, a warning he no longer had the strength to enforce. His eyes, though wary, seemed to hold a flicker of something else, not just aggression, but a deep, primal fear. He was a king without a kingdom, a fighter without a fight left to give. Ilara cut the engine and sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the soft click of her camera as she documented the tragedy. She wasn't taking photos for a magazine. She was documenting the evidence, a solemn promise to report this to the rangers and have the snare removed. She was a witness, but something in her refused to let it end there. The lion's eyes, those weary, magnificent windows to a soul in torment, seemed to plead with her. She knew in that moment that she would not be just a witness. She would be a participant in his fight for survival. She grabbed her largest water bottle and a small bag of supplies. She would return to her camp and contact the rangers, but not before she did what she could to give this magnificent creature a chance to survive. She spoke to him, her voice soft and soothing, her words a gentle plea for calm. "I won't hurt you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I am here to help." The lion watched her, his head low, his chest heaving with each ragged breath. He had been alone in the savannah. Now a stranger had appeared, and in her presence a faint, almost imperceptible flicker of hope against all odds began to stir. Please subscribe to the channel for the next chapter of this incredible story. Remember, this is a work of fiction. Ilara's plan was a delicate balance of audacity and extreme caution. After a tense few hours, she managed to drive back to her camp, a simple tent on a raised platform, and make contact with the nearest ranger outpost via a satellite phone. The ranger, a veteran named Juma, listened patiently as Ilara described the lion and the snare, his voice grave. Poaching was a constant threat, and every day brought a new challenge. He assured her that a team would be dispatched as soon as possible, but the journey to her location would take time, at least a day. With the lion's fate hanging in the balance, a day felt like an eternity. Ilara knew she couldn't simply wait. She had to act. Returning to the scene, she found the lion exactly where she had left him, a silent statue of despair under the unforgiving sun. His condition had worsened. He was no longer trying to struggle. He was simply lying there, defeated. Her immediate priority was water. Dehydration in this heat could kill him faster than the snare itself. She approached cautiously, leaving a large jerrycan of water a safe distance away. Using a long, sturdy branch, she slowly nudged the container closer, spilling some of the precious liquid into a hollowed-out rock. The lion lifted his head, his eyes following her every move, but he was too weak to show any aggression. He lowered his head and drank long, desperate gulps that seemed to revitalize him, if only for a moment. The next few hours were a dance of tentative trust. Ilara, a respectful distance away, spent her time observing and talking to him in a low, gentle voice. She spoke of her life, of the beauty of the savannah she had photographed, of the animals she had seen. She wasn't sure if he understood, but the sound of her voice seemed to have a calming effect. His breathing, once ragged and fast, became slower and more even. The snare itself was the main problem. The wire, made of reinforced steel, was impossibly tight. She knew she couldn't cut it with her small multi-tool. She needed a more powerful tool, something a ranger would carry. She rummaged through her supplies, her mind racing. The best she could do was try to lessen the tension. Using the same long, sturdy branch, she tried to pry at the mechanism, her heart in her throat. The lion watched her, his eyes unblinking, his trust in her growing by the minute. He flinched with a low groan when her movements caused him pain, but he did not lash out. He was waiting. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, Ilara's frustration mounted. The snare wouldn't budge. She sat on the hood of her vehicle, a feeling of helplessness washing over her. She was a storyteller, not a veterinarian. She was a witness, not a rescuer. But the lion's silent suffering had transformed her. She was no longer just Ilara, the photographer. She was Ilara, the lion's last hope. As darkness fell, a new set of dangers emerged. The sound of hyenas cackling in the distance was a chilling reminder of the lion's vulnerability. He was the king of the savannah, but he was now a wounded animal, easy prey. Ilara knew she couldn't leave him alone. She decided to spend the night there, sleeping in the safety of her Land Rover, her senses on high alert. The stars in the Kenyan sky burned with a fierce, brilliant light, but all she could see was the magnificent creature lying 100 feet away, his amber eyes reflecting a silent plea for survival. She stayed awake most of the night, shining her high-powered flashlight into the darkness every time she heard a sound. The hyenas came closer, their eyes glowing like malevolent embers in the dark. But the lion, even in his weakened state, was still a deterrent. His low, menacing growl, though soft, was enough to keep the scavengers at bay. In this silent vigil, Ilara felt a profound sense of connection to the animal. It was not just a rescue, It was a pact, a silent promise made between a human and a wild heart. The night was long and full of danger, but together, in their shared solitude, they waited for the dawn. The first light of dawn brought a renewed sense of purpose. Ilara, having managed a few hours of fitful sleep, found the lion weak but alive. She had a new idea. Instead of trying to pry the snare open, she would try to use a different approach. She took a thin, flexible piece of steel wire from her repair kit and, with a trembling hand, began to carefully thread it through a small gap in the snare's mechanism. It was a painstaking, delicate task, demanding the kind of patience she normally reserved for macro photography. The lion watched her, his head up, his eyes locked onto her hands. He seemed to understand, a quiet trust in his amber gaze that was both humbling and terrifying. He was placing his life in her hands. With the small wire, she managed to reach the release catch, a tiny, almost invisible piece of the trap. She pushed, pulled and twisted, her fingers cramping with the strain. Finally, with a soft, almost inaudible click, the snare sprung open. For a moment, nothing happened. The lion's leg was free, but he remained motionless, as if not daring to believe it. Ilara backed away slowly, her heart hammering in her chest, her eyes filled with tears of relief. He tested the leg tentatively, a low, rumbling groan of pain and freedom escaping his throat. He was still injured, the wound deep and raw, but he was no longer trapped. He stood, a magnificent silhouette against the rising sun, and for a long moment their eyes met. It was a silent conversation, a profound acknowledgement of the shared ordeal. He didn't run. He just looked at her, his head held high, the kingly dignity returning to his weary eyes. He was not thanking her. He was acknowledging her. He was seeing her not as a threat, but as an unusual and unexpected force of nature, one that had brought him back from the brink. A new sound then broke the stillness, the unmistakable roar of a land cruiser's engine in the distance. The rangers had arrived. Ilara felt a flood of relief wash over her. Juma, the lead ranger, and his team pulled up, their faces a mixture of surprise and admiration as they took in the scene. The lion, now free but still limping, stood his ground, a clear message that he was not to be approached. Ilara explained what had happened, her voice filled with emotion. Juma nodded, his face etched with respect. "You did a very brave thing, Ilara," he said, his voice quiet. "You gave him a chance. Now we can do our part." The rangers, using a tranquilizer dart, quickly and expertly sedated the lion. They cleaned and stitched the deep wound, applying a powerful antiseptic to prevent further infection. They then attached a GPS collar to monitor his recovery and ensure he wouldn't be ensnared again. As the lion began to stir from the tranquilizer, the rangers prepared to leave. Ilara took one last look at him, her heart full. He was free, and he was being watched over by people who cared. She had come to the Savannah to document its beauty, but she had become a part of its story. She had witnessed the triumph of a wild heart and the quiet, powerful connection between two different worlds. She had arrived as a stranger, but she was leaving as a friend. Don't miss the rest of their journey. Subscribe now for the next chapters. Remember, this story is a fictional dramatization.